Gentlelady yields back. This time, I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Flores, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the panel for joining us today. This has been a fascinating discussion, particularly with respect to government overreach. Professor Tribe, the question of takings has come up in the course of this conversation today. Professor Revis, a few minutes ago, indicated that it wasn't a problem. But you indicate that the rule's impact has raises Fifth Amendment or takings concerns. Can you tell us what you mean by that? Can you expand?
What I mean, I think, is best illustrated by decisions that involve not only the takings and compensation clauses, but the due process clause. As the Supreme Court has held in a number of cases, including one where the EPA initially promised confidential treatment to pesticide makers and then pulled the rug out from under them, and another in which the United States government offered companies more favorable accounting treatment if they would bail out failing S&Ls and then reneged. In cases like that, the Supreme Court has found a doctrinal basis either in the contract clause or in the due process clause or in the takings clause for saying that even though you haven't wiped somebody off the map entirely, you've left them with some value. If you lead them to take a course of action and then pull the rug out from under them, fairness requires some kind of compensation. And in particular, the way the coal companies have been led on here is well known. This was something that was encouraged by the government, and in particular, when they were forced to invest billions of dollars in meeting the requirements under 112 with respect to the hazardous pollutants, they were pouring money down a hole, and they were not told, guess what, it's all gone, because the state that you live in has no choice other than to put you out of business.
Well, that sort of brings me back to my next question related to 111D. This seems to be on shaky legal ground already. It's already the subject of lawsuits that haven't been finalized yet. And so, Ms. Wood, what happens if the states start implementing the final rule only to have the court strike the rule down? And what do these states do? What if they've already started signing the contracts? People started breaking grounds on investments or making capital commitments for investments. What happens next?
Yeah, there's two sets of, harm that can happen here. One is to the states and the other is to the power plants themselves. And when you're looking at the states, they're having to start now to prepare these plans. In the litigation that's pending, the state of Alabama, for example, submitted an affidavit that said that this was by far the most complex undertaking that the state of Alabama Environment Department had undertaken in 40 years. So it's a lot of capital being expended to come up with these plans. Most states are going to need to enact legislation and put in place regulations. So if at the end of that time period, this is all found to be unlawful, well, all of that effort will have been lost. But more importantly, to the extent legislation and regulations have been put in place, all of that's going to have to be reversed. And, that's also going to be time consuming. And then, as you said, power plants need to start planning now, and so they can enter into contracts and can have financial.
Right. And what goes unsaid here, but is obvious, is that the consumers and the taxpayers and the ratepayers all bear the cost of that. Continue on Section 111D. It's the basis for the Clean Power Plan that the EPA has come up with. But this provision, as I understand it, has seldom been used in the EPA's 44-year history. The Supreme Court also recently said it's skeptical when an agency claims to discover in a long extant statute an unheralded power to regulate a significant portion of the U.S. economy. And so, Ms. Wood, another question for you. Isn't it correct that in the 1990 amendments to the Clean Air Act, only one Section 111D regulation has been promulgated that still exists?
Yes, that is correct. As Professor Tribe has talked about, there was one version of Section 111D that was actually promulgated. It is the House version. It is what is shown right now in the United States Code. And it precludes regulation of source categories under 111D if they're already regulated under 112.
Well, that was sort of my next question, is these have always had very limited reach.
Oh, yes, very limited reach. It really was designed by Congress to be a catch-all for something that slipped through the cracks. These sources are not slipping through the cracks. They're being regulated under 112 and having to install maximum achievable control technology.
Right. So there's never been an expansive use of 111D like this that we're proposing. So Professor Tribe, would you like to comment?
Well, I agree.
You've got 2 seconds.
It's only been used for 4 pollutants and 5 sources. They're very specialized and localized, like municipal waste landfills or sulfuric acid plants, which give off acid mist. And the idea that it's nothing new, just business as usual, is the most fantastic account I've heard.
Okay. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. This time recognize the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr.